Greetings and blessings, my brothers and sisters in Christ. I am Robert, and this is the I Am Matthew podcast, where we talk about walking out our Christian faith and trying to be in the world, but not of the world. I am so excited. This is bonus episode time, and so let's get right into it. So like I said, it's bonus episode time, and since it's only number 2, I decided that anytime that I get someone on the podcast to come and share their story, it's going to be a bonus episode. So you know what that means. I am out of my studio, and today I'm actually sitting in a house at a table, a really nice house at a table. And it also means more of my stutters and stammers, which I pray that God will remove, or the editing software. So let me talk about Jeremy Sisson. I've known him for about 5 years, and I've had the pleasure to walk out struggles with him side by side. We have done ministry together with Celebrate Recovery, Living Free sessions. We can get into all of that, but first I want to welcome you, Jeremy, to the I Am Matthew podcast.
Thank you very much, Robert. I'm excited to do this. It's been something that we've talked about for a while, and I'm ready.
Yeah, I'm very excited. And I really wanted to get you on here just because, like I said, we have done so much ministry together. And so I really wanted to get you on here just because, like I said, I started with my wife, and then I decided to choose you just because I'm most comfortable with you, and I really do believe that you have a really powerful story. So I guess that's the first thing we should get into because it is a powerful testimony. Can you kind of give us a brief summary of your testimony?
Well, sure. As I said, thanks for having me. We've talked about, we've known each other for probably close to 5 years and have done ministry together. Mainly, a lot of it. It's our music. You being the sound tech and then me drumming. So we're together about every week, but we've had Bible studies, and so we've got to see. There's not too much we don't know about each other when it comes to just being real with each other.
Absolutely.
So this is fairly comfortable to talk about. So I guess I'll just go ahead and get started. I grew up in a small town from Linnaeus here, about 30 minutes away from here. Grew up there. All my life, lived in the same home, had awesome Christian parents. I would say you could probably categorize it, to me anyway. Somebody else looking at it may not have thought so, but it was a Leave It to Beaver thing. We were there. I had both parents, loved each other. I didn't see, very many arguments, if any, and were good Christian parents and loved the Lord and raised us in church. I was in church since the weekend after I was born, so I've been in church, and for all my life, and so we went to a local church there in town, and it didn't have as much for children as they thought, so it should have for us to be raising us in church. It's important. We've learned at our church that you have the kids. That's the future of the church. If you don't have kids, you don't really have as much as a future for the church.
There's got to be something for the kids.
Yeah, you have a dying church if you're not renewing it.
Oh yeah, because the new generations is what replaces you. Otherwise, you just die out and there's no more church.
That's right. So mom and dad realized that they wanted something for us as well. So I was probably pre-teen when they made the decision to move, and we moved to a church there in a work field. So we had to drive a little bit, and that was all the change. But we went to a Pentecostal church. Was our first, exposure to a Pentecostal church from a Baptist. And of course, we loved it because we loved the music. Didn't realize we liked the music as much as we would, but they had 2 drum sets.
I was going to say they definitely
double time for me.
They definitely stepped it up a notch from Baptist to Pentecostal.
That's right. And the preacher at the time had been newly saved out of the honky tonks, and he was a musician, so music was a big deal. He played the bass, and he played the bass, led worship, and then his one of his friends, his guitar player, he got saved as well. So they all meshed really well. So there was nights that we would get there, and he'd lead music, and you knew he wasn't going to get to preaching. It was just music. Yeah. And as young kids, being exposed to that for the first time. The spirit moving, and then just the music itself and what it meant, to seeing somebody, because I at the time he hadn't been saved very long, and it's so real. The emotion he had was, he was delivered, and it was a great deal for him, and he was glad to talk about it and sing about it, and he sung the older songs that were very, very in your face, this is what God did for me. And so it was great. So we got, exposed to that and fell in love with it. And, probably our callings were from that. I ended up playing drums there at the age of 18, or excuse me, at the age of 13. And my brother, he kind of picked up the bass. He liked the bass part. And so we played in that church until actually, even after I got married, I felt, driving, I just felt there was something else, so I found a local church in town here and started going and had an opportunity to play there. And there, some issues came up, and there was another guy there. And so I just kind of stepped back and then I said, Lord, I'm not going because of music. I love it here and I would love to minister in the music, but I want what you want for me here. Yeah. I'm going to go regardless. I'm not going to get offended. I'm going to go, and I'm going to and grow, go and grow. So as I did that, it's probably a couple, 3 months, and then that all kind of shook out, and then I just kind of stepped right into it. We started a youth band, and we started, and the youth leader and one other guy, and we just kind of meshed really well and ended up playing for the youth, and he ended up leading worship, so it kind of made a full circle for me. So I've had, the opportunities to play a lot of music in church and worship, and that's a big deal for me. So, but to digress just a little bit here, I got married at the age of 20, and
which is funny. I didn't know you did that because I got married at the age of 20 as well.
Yeah,
so.
I graduated. I was young in my class. So I graduated when I was 17. So I had actually been out of school. I was like 20, but I had been out of school a couple of years,
Yeah.
And then the woman that I married at the time was the same scenario. She was the youngest one in her class. So anyway, so we got married and started a family and had a great, we had a great life. It was very, 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 very good. Very fluid. Just worked really well. I had 2 girls and just loved them to death. They're good kids, and and as we started to work through things, I kind of and the reason why that I'm on here is to talk about what my struggle was, and it was lust and pornography. And I was exposed to that at a fairly young age, probably right at preteen or teen. I had a friend of mine that wasn't raised in a Christian home, and he was raised by, some of his family members that weren't Christians and had it around. It was magazines at the time because you didn't have cell phones or anything like that. So it was a minimal exposure, but at the time I didn't realize that it was affecting. There was roots that had put down, and it was actually, I realize now, it was probably a hurt that I was being exposed to, but it didn't feel like a hurt.
No, no, absolutely not.
Most of the time when you hurt something you don't do that again.
Yeah.
But and it was off and on, and so I just kind of, it wasn't something that I struggled with so much, but it was kind of there, we got cable when we were kids, and this was crazy. We didn't get Showtime. We didn't pay for Showtime. It was just a certain package, and we didn't want Showtime because we knew there was stuff on there, and we would get it. It was the craziest thing ever. It would come in crystal clear, and I can remember my mom calling and going, "Hey, we need to take this off," and they're like, "Ma'am, you don't pay for this."
Yep.
But she's like, well, I don't care if I pay for it or not.
It's funny me thinking about that. I had that exact same problem. We had HBO, Cinemax, and Showtime, and we never paid for one of them. And yeah, so I completely understand.
So it was one of those things, that as we got older and we stayed up later and mom and dad went to bed, as most people do, you'd turn that on, and after 10:30, it could be kind of rough.
Yep.
And so it was just something that you would just kind of do and kind of flip in and out of, and hopefully you didn't get caught, and you just kind of move on. Well, then, once again, as I got married and went on and had a family, it wasn't that big a deal because there wasn't access. Like I said, again, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have any of that. So, But in 2000, I can remember there was two major things that happened. And got married in 94. So this was quite a ways after, but in 2000, we got a computer and I started work for the police department. So the computer was a direct port into the house. It still wasn't, like it is now, but it was still fairly accessible.
Yep.
And then you try to think, well, can I find it? Is it free? Well, then, there's stuff that was free, you don't have to pay for anything, know? And so I kind of struggled with it then, but, as I went through my career, as a police officer for several years, I saw a lot of junk and maybe kind of internalized it, and realized that I kind of medicated with, that. I come home, work a 5, p.m. to 3 a.m. shift, and there's nobody, all the kids are asleep. My wife is asleep. It is a way to just kind of, if you had a rough evening, to just unwind, and which it is an awful way to do it, but it was, and I wish I would have realized what I was doing at the time was that was the symptom, more of a symptom than it was the problem, but I didn't know that. And this is why I'm so, I want to say proactive when it comes to this in a church, is because at the time I didn't feel like I went to church and had a lot of my best friend was the pastor, but it wasn't talked about.
Yeah.
I couldn't like pick up the phone like I could you and go, hey dude, this week has really stunk.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of dealing with this week, or the men's group every week going, I've had a rough week, guys, I've blown it.
Yeah.
And, and then try to find out what that was and then fix it, repent from it, move on, and not live in a world where I'm condemned by it all the time. So it was really rough. So as it went on and as we, went through our lives, we just got older, things got easier. For me, I realized that easy maybe isn't the best thing. I think a guy has to have something to do. I think he should be doing something.
Yeah.
Whether it's a hobby or whether it's, we loved our home and always worked on our home. But I had a lot of spare time. Boredom is if you don't manage boredom, that's not either. I heard a guy say the other day that, being alone or drawing into a withdrawn state, if it's not managed with accountability, there's a devastation that'll come with it.
Yeah.
And man, it does.
Absolutely.
It really does.
I agree.
So you have a good life. You're not worrying about much. Your kids are good. You're not chasing them around. You're not having to get them out of jail. They do good things and, like what you like. My oldest and I have always shared music together. My youngest liked to dance and we danced and, we just did whatever they did, wholeheartedly and just kind of grew up. But the pornography got really rough for me. So much so, I changed jobs. I went out on the road, which is a job I didn't really, I felt like I should, but I was very uncomfortable. I'm not a salesman. It was outside sales. I traveled and drove. I drove the same 3,000 miles every month, same people, it just got monotonous and I wasn't really happy with that. But I made pretty decent money and, I did that for about 4 or 5 years. I dealt with that. I was on the road by myself in a motel room, had a cell phone. They gave me a cell phone that had internet on it. It was, if you were trying to lay out a perfect plan to addict a dude, I had it.
Yeah.
And the safeguards, when you haven't prepared or been showed the safeguards, it's so crazy. You get so deceived. The safeguards are there, but you don't know what they're there.
Yeah.
I could have done that differently.
Yeah.
But I just didn't, or I didn't feel like I could. So, and then I'm still dealing with the emotion of it. So it was, trying to feel better. I sat in a motel room in the night by myself. I didn't go to a bar like some of the sales guys did. I didn't go. There's guys going to strip clubs. They were doing all kinds of things at night. Well, I didn't do that. Yeah. So I ate early. I was kind of like an old man. I was back by the room by 5:30. That's a long night, And so I passed most of the night away by just doing things and looking at things that weren't glorifying. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
And I would take my Bible. I was trying to, make it that didn't work. Yeah, I was trying to. I was fooling myself, thinking I would, and I should have, dedicated my time more to that. But so after a while, that got, we're 20 some years into the marriage, and then I changed jobs again because it was local, and I could work in town, and it was a pay cut, but it wasn't, a huge pay cut. But I guess I realized that that was a bigger thing for me than than really what I thought it was going to be, and then started that job, and there were some things with the job that were just, is it a computer system that was old, and it wasn't going to stay after he was there, and I had to learn it short term, and it was just a lot of rough things. It wasn't a hard job. It was just, I knew there were things I was going to have to go through, and it just got really bad.
Yeah.
And, we're talking hours a day. Yeah. It could have been 4 or 5 hours a day.
Wow.
From taking your phone to the bathroom, and to just, if you were sitting down, there wasn't a quiet time, deer hunting. This is crazy. Sitting in your deer stand, just passing time. It's a great time to pass time. But, you don't realize that you corrupt everything that you do.
Well, you think about it. If you really think about that mindset and you apply that to other people, like people that like to drink alcohol.
Yeah,
They'll sit there and they'll drink beer while they're in the deer stand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or somebody likes to do drugs. When there is a free opportunity, that's what they go to. Yeah. That's their fix.
Yep. And it's a twofold. It was a time pass. It was a time passer, but it was also this just feeding this addiction.
Yeah.
So, it just came to where it affected my marriage, and there was other things that went along. But long story short, in 2018 things got really bad, and within a year and a half, I got divorced, and it wasn't all because of that, but it was a lot because of that, and it broke me, literally broke me. It was something I thought that like we could get through, and at that time it was 25 years, 26 years, 24 is 25 years. So, you have, I didn't I haven't been with anybody else, and it's, God fixes everything, and you just pray hard enough, it fixes, and so I worked on me, and I struggled. It was rough. At that time, the oppression and just the spirit of, I had a terrible spirit of oppression and suicidal thoughts were just terrible. I couldn't sleep. I would be tormented, and it was just and my wife at the time would say, I don't know why you're not sleeping. You're just wore out. And I'm like, well, because I can't. I got even to the point where I wouldn't even want to sleep in the same bed with her because it felt so bad that I thought she has to be feeling this. It was so intense to me. I was afraid something was going to get off on her, come off on her, and she would feel it. I didn't want that for her. Well, then she's like, I don't even know why, you're doing that. And I was trying to do all things at once, and it was just so chaotic that, some things happened, and I found out that there was some other things going on in her life that weren't good. So we separated. I left the house because I was mad, and we had rental property at the time, and stayed in an apartment for a little bit. And while I was there, one evening I was just so hurt I just didn't know what to do. And I took a lot of pills. I took a lot. And I can remember laying down. I had an air mattress, didn't even have a bed on the floor, air mattress, and it was just a little apartment that had leaked water, and it was moldy smelling, and it was, but I can remember praying when I went to bed, and with a sense of relief that I wasn't going to wake up in the morning. And I went to bed, sent him my normal text at night, told him I loved him, which I did. That wasn't a lie. It's never a lie. And about 6 o'clock, I woke up with the alarm. And I can remember this just as plain as day. I was so disappointed when the alarm went off. And I thought, I got to do this again. I got to get up and go to work. I tried to work. The people at work were great because for about a year and a half, I wasn't myself, So, I went through that, and so about a month after that, I moved. I chose to move back home, and of course, it wasn't any better. And then I just found out more and more stuff that was going on, and so anyway, she had found out my wife had found out that I had tried to take my life with pills, and then we had a pastor friend of ours at the time, and she said, I think you ought to get some help, and I said, okay, I didn't want to be this way, I didn't deer hunt that year. Very, very, had my brother and dad over and set them. And I was afraid to be in the deer stand by myself. I didn't trust myself. I played it off as I wasn't feeling good. And you can make it, you lie, you can make it work, whatever, but they didn't know that. They didn't realize what I was going through. I just didn't trust myself to sit out there. I'm thinking, man, I don't want to be here anymore. I can't hurt like this anymore. So I ended up going to a facility in Kansas, and for 7 days, before that I had seen a psychiatrist, and I had been prescribed some drugs that weren't the best for me. One of it being a very powerful stimulant, and there would be days I wouldn't sleep, and just.
I was gonna say you're pretty overstimulated, anyways.
Well, yeah, you can imagine there was, and then come to find out I was taking way too much of it. When I was checked in there, she took me down, and we checked in, and then I slept for 3 days straight.
Oh wow.
Yep. They would come in. I can remember them coming in, checking on me, and making sure I was still breathing. Checking on us, and of course they didn't have the doors shut, but that place was so loud. It had tile floors. I got earplugs when I got checked in. I'm like, what do I need earplugs for? Well, you had to sleep with earplugs in. You didn't get quiet, So I thought I had it, they took my shoestrings, had put rubber shoestrings in, I'm thinking they may feel like I couldn't wear my watch. I'm a time freak. I don't want to know what time it is, and I'm like, you treat me like a criminal, and I'm it was just that phase I was in, and I understood. So as I was there about 3 days after I kind of got leveled out, and the doctor said, I just think you're just on too much of this stuff. You're hurt. She knew what I was going through. I told her I was going through a divorce. I didn't want it. And she's like, so she changed, just put me on a basic antidepressant, and the way we went. And things got really a lot better for me, So, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. You just can't, I would sleep, thinking about it. And I'd wake up, sleep, thinking about it. And you just didn't get away from it. And so I was there 7 days, and she came and got me and my older daughter. And then we came home, and I thought things were going to be so good. And, things just didn't turn out the best. So, we separated for about a year, which was real rough for me. I still, decided that I wanted we kind of changed churches in the middle of that because some friends of ours were pastors, and they took another pastor position clear out of town. So we kind of lost our best friends. At that time, it was just a huge deal. So we started to go to Live Point, which was new for us, which we knew everybody was there. But so we ended up, I ended up going and talking to, Pastor Brent, and, I said, hey, this is what's going on. I just laid it out. I didn't hide anything. This is it. This is what I've done. This is what I'm trying to do to fix this. And I said, I need some help. And he goes, well, he says, I'll get you, I know who you need to talk to. He says, you need to, I said, I'm going to get Pastor Kevin. And I'm thinking, I didn't come to see Pastor Kevin. I don't know Pastor Kevin. I don't know Pastor Kevin. I just spilled the dirt to you.
Yeah.
And he's like, I really, and so I was kind of almost put off just a little, but, Pastor Kevin reached out to me shortly, and I met him, and, he kind of had a backstory, and it was just kind of a great friendship, ensued from that. And I would tell him, I said, I wake up, I said, I wear this cloak of, it was just heaviness. I was so oppressed, and, the life I knew that is no longer there. Nothing, your friends are different. You're in a new church. You're living in an apartment and, by yourself. And, we talked, and we just kind of got together and just kind of stayed together. And, I told him, I said, we need something, in church because I know there's guys that are suffering from this. And my plea to him was, man, if we could stop somebody from going through this, a married guy, anybody, but to lose your marriage for something like this, I said, well, if we gotta go get the guys, and make it real for them, give them a spot to talk to, and know that they're not just coming in on Sunday morning. When you're bound like that, you can't worship. Oh, yeah. You don't get no freedom from it. There's no freedom in coming into a church when you're bound like that. You do it in secrecy. It's a secret thing, and it thrives in the darkness. So, and then, guys aren't really good about telling their emotions. And the reason why, because a lot of times when they tell their wives or somebody that's close to them, then they seem to feel judged, or there is a judgment.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't know you felt that way. And then they almost make fun of them.
Yeah.
So, or that's your problem, not mine. You need to get it fixed. Well, okay, but what's that look like? So I said, we need to do something. So I started going to the Monday night service of CR, and, which was a really good thing at the time. There's a lot going on at that time.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
There was a lot of people in there that were, just struggling and getting freedom from things. It was really a good time for all this to happen. You kind of look back at it and think, man, it was so intense, but all the groundwork that things are going now, it was laid at that time.
Yeah, absolutely.
From everybody there, from Brad to just everybody that's there. Everybody that was kind of coming and being there, was very good.
Yeah.
Paul and all the guys that were starting, their journey started there.
Yeah.
And so I started doing that, and then I kept pushing Kevin a little bit to have a sexual integrity group for men, and as you know, we did. And he said, well, I don't really have any curriculum for it right at the moment, but he said, let's just do something. So he would bring us in and he'd talk to us, and basically at the time there was 3 or 4 men that were just busted, and he would start by saying, okay guys, how was your week?
Yep.
And we did that every week. And we'd go around the corner, and it was pathetic. It was pitiful. How you made it through this week without messing up? Well, ain't nobody at the time was, not messing up necessarily for me. I can say probably a year before that, as I was going through this, I did shut off access to my phone, internet access, which was a great thing for me. I had to shut that off. So I was walking through that, but then walking through the divorce, and still walking through stuff. And every week, some weeks we go in and go, man, we did good, or we had some freedom from it. And then the next week, man, if you had any freedom the week before, you just almost count you was going to get it double hammered the week after, so we'd come in, and finally, it was just, there was some things growing, but it was just, he'd share the word with us, lots of scripture. You guys got to be in the word, got to be in the scripture. And I think I understand that, but what is, I need something, I wanted it to change. And the thing that I could remember him telling me when I first started talking to Kevin, he's like, okay, this is going to be a process. He said, it's not going to be easy, not going to be fast. He said, you didn't get in it all at once, and you're not going to come out of it, but it's a process. And man, I got so tired of hearing it's a process.
It's a process.
I'd say this week was awful, or I'd say this week was better, and then, like I said, the next week might be worse. Well, it's a process, But, and my confusion was I don't know what to fight. I was dealing with my divorce. I was dealing with, the lust and not dealing with that, but then what do I do with my time? Because now you have tons of time, because it was just a filler.
Yep.
What do I do with my time? I was living by myself. I hadn't lived by myself ever. I got married and moved in with my wife at the time. So I was learning how to do all that. It was a big deal, living by yourself, sleeping by yourself, without your kiddos, without your home.
Yeah.
It's not your home.
Yeah.
And the reality of is my home, I'm not ever going to have my home, that home again.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, and then if you remember that, we had probably, several months of that. And then, Kevin, has decided he's moving,
Yep.
And we're all like, what are we
going to do?
What are we going to do? And I texted and talked to Kevin. He goes, well, it's all yours if you want it. And I'm like, oh, what? I'm not even, what?
Yeah.
I can't, he's like, well, he said, just keep doing what we're doing. And I'm thinking to lead, or to do it. But we just had to move. And we shared in the roles.
Yep.
You would take it one week and, Bryce and all them guys would do it. They would take it. But, it was just one of those things where, we kept it going. And then, we moved to a different format on a Monday night, and they actually had a sexual integrity book and actually had a class and some curriculum for it. So then we was kind of excited about it because then, so we did. So we went from 4 to about 10 when we had the first. Right. We had the first one, and it was really good. There was a lot of good things come out of that. Still do. I mean, all the people that are, excuse me. We had one person. I don't think that was actually from our church. Excuse me, but I still see him every once in a while.
Yeah.
And, he's doing great, and so, we went through that. I said, 13 weeks, I think is what it is. And it just kind of kept going through that. And so in 2000, November 2000, I got officially divorced. And
2000? You mean like 2018, 19?
2020.
2020. There you go.
2020. Yeah, I was thinking 20. So, and then I was starting to, kind of live in my home. I got my home, kind of got settled, and we started having a men's group here. And I've always had something here since that's kind of been the heart of mine, to have something here for the men. And we've had home group, men's group. And so, and then I started dating, and that was a whole new deal that just I hadn't prepared for. And, didn't do that right a lot of times, but I knew it, and I would confess that. I'd tell some of my guys, okay, I'm not doing this right. This isn't working right. And I wanted my life to go the right direction. And it's just some of the things you just have to be so purposeful about. So, and as we were going, we all kind of come out of things changed for us. Absolutely. Really, really good. I mean, there's things that have just, I don't know if we've endured them out, but God has just really worked for us. But I can remember one night when I was in my little apartment, and that oppression was, it was literally, I would tell Kevin, I just wear it like a blanket and I can't get out from underneath it. And I remember he had a message on calling out when the Israelite people actually cried out, physically cried out. That's when he moved them out, And so one night after, it was a Sunday, and it was probably all week, and I'd had a crappy week because the devil never lets go. He never stops. Sleep was a very rough thing for me. Didn't rest much. I went to work a lot of times, and it was rough. Called in a lot. I had sick time, so it wasn't a huge deal, but it was rough. I can remember one Friday night, I didn't go anywhere, and I just struggled that night. And I remember getting at the end of my bed, and I just cried out, and I said, God, if you don't take this away from me, I had been in bed, and that spirit of evil, I would have it at times. I could almost hear. I can remember one time I was at home, and it was just this evilness. I felt like I was hearing it. It's just like, it was like, drive to the front of the church and sit in front of the doors and then shoot yourself in front of the church.
Yeah.
That's how specific it got at times. And of course, I would just work through that, and I'd eventually fall asleep. But so that night I cried out, and I fell asleep on the floor, and I woke up about probably probably 3 o'clock, and got into bed. And then I know it was a Saturday morning. Sun was just shining. I can remember it coming through the windows. And when I put my feet on the ground, I knew it was different. I didn't have that. I could feel it. It was, I could get a break from it. And it wasn't like, okay, it's coming, and then it kind of runs back over you. There was a break. And I had been with the girls that weekend afterwards, and they said, Dad, you just seem different. And then I told them what had happened. And I said, just keep a watch, because make sure that I'm not just thinking this. And yeah, it was very, God just kind of took that away from me. And so when I got kind of out from under that, then I could actually see maybe a light a light at the end of the tunnel. And the devil likes to run over me with it at times. He puts a vehicle behind that light sometimes and runs me over with it. But I can think, okay, I can, if I have bad days or have that issue, I don't carry it for as long.
Yeah.
Those would get shorter and shorter. And I'd say, Lord, okay, Lord, I see you working. I can see, I had to set stakes almost to see, because, it's not, as Kevin would say, it's not going to be fast. It's going to be a process. So, as I did that and got in with the church, and of course, being single, I just spent a lot of time at the church. My church was my saving grace at the time, just to not be alone, and two, to be actually growing. And, in ministry, at CR, I gave, my testimony the first time and was still going through all this, being addicted to pornography and just less than what it had done to my life, and, a guy that I know all my life had said, he come out and said he struggles with it. Well, I said, that's really great. He said, but I didn't until till I heard you. And here I was just being obedient and honest. So even in the midst of the junk, that what little testimony I had, no matter where it was still powerful and still was changing somebody else. It's not me. It was just the power of being able to talk about it, give him the ability to go, okay.
Gave him hope. Yeah.
Yeah. He struggles with this. I've known this guy all my life, So, and ended up being, in one of our groups. And so, even I was realizing at the time I needed help, but as we grew, there was people that were in that position that needed it too. So, don't ever think that as you're coming through, I got to get all the way out before I start to help. Well, for one, you may not ever get all the way out.
Yeah.
I don't know what all the way out looks like, but, but I know enough now that I can turn around and grab a guy's hand and go, okay, you got to come this way, this direction. You're going to have to do this to come out and to go the right direction. And you want to tell guys, I can remember Kevin saying, he talks to guys, he never mentioned any names or anything, but he was like, I talk to guys every week that it's not severe enough to them. They're coming in saying, I'm about to lose everything I got, but didn't change them, and I'm thinking, I was broke, and a lot of times our stupid flesh, we have to be broke.
Yep.
And God will do that.
Yep. He will. He'll allow you to be broken.
That's right. And, and to be honest, at times that's where the most glory comes from.
Absolutely. What was the thing you used to tell everybody for our Celebrate Recovery and Living Free? What was the thing you always told them about them coming in two ways? Yeah,
you can come in on your own, or you'll got a break in, you'll come in. But either way, you need to come in here. You need to be in here.
Yeah.
You can do it on your own, or if God loves you, which He does, and cares about you, He'll make it happen.
Yeah.
It may not be now, it may not be tomorrow, but it's going to happen.
Yeah.
So let me tell you, from a guy that had it all busted and broke, that's not the cool way to do it.
No, it's not. No, it's not. I agree with you. I'm the same way.
If you cherish what you have, and God cares more about your soul than anything you have.
That's right.
So when you look at it, He takes away the stuff that's in the way.
Yeah.
And
because God can use broken, and so whatever stuff you have, it's all His anyways. So He can get rid of that stuff.
That's right.
And get the person that the person that He wants. He wants to save you, and all the other stuff. He can make everything else work.
That's people. That's things. That's jobs. That's family members. Whatever that is, He can remove them, take them out, move them around. He's not above doing anything, and thank God that he isn't.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I can't, I really love him, but I don't want to, his marriage. Well, he cares more about my salvation and my soul than he did my marriage.
Yeah.
And that's a tough thing to think about, knowing what he feels about marriage. But I'm not married in heaven.
Yeah.
And if you're into something else that you're putting before God, he can take it away. And times he'll do that. So he did that on me, and I realized that at the time it was painful. But long story short, it was a couple years later. I had dated and met this young lady, and we kind of had some mutual friends in together, and we knew them. They were good Christian folks, and we dated for a while, and then we ended up getting married, and got married on Good Friday, and
there you go.
So I've started, I started my life over. I told my mom and dad celebrated, I think, their 50th last year, and I know you've heard this story, but
yeah,
I said, I was so heartbroken, that I really, I didn't want to be divorced. It was rough for me, and I said I wanted 50. I said I want 50 like you and Dad. And my mom's a good Christian lady, just very sweet, and I was sitting beside her, and she just put her hand over my leg, and she says, well, she said, maybe he'll just give you 2 25s. And I thought, there's a silver lining.
Yeah.
There's a silver lining in everything. You just got to find it.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that about you, Jeremy. You always seem to find the silver lining in everything. So.
Well, but I wasn't that way. That's something I learned through all my trials. Is I don't go through it and then go, God, what was that? Yeah. It's like, okay, God, what do you want me to learn from this? Okay, I'm going through this now. I see what I'm going through. I try to see out of it. Now, I can't always see out of it, but I think God's got something better. He's got something better. Yeah. We talked about things that happened to you, and you come in and say, hey, this is what happened. I said, God's got something better.
Yeah.
And it did. It took a while to manifest.
Yeah.
But there are things, and it changed 2 or 3 times because, it's not that we want to drive it or set it up, but it does change, and sometimes we kind of get in the way, and I'm trying to not be that person, to be out of the way and let God lead me. But I still struggle with depression. I think a lot of what I struggle with was, and I did seek medical help. I did talk to a guy and told him, hey, I have these sexual compulsions, I never had really a physical affair, but it was enough on paper that it was still the same.
Yeah.
And, and then with depression, and he's like, okay, well, you do realize that, your depression is probably the reason. You don't feel good. You're dealing with that. So you're looking to feel better. He said, just remember, all this was a symptom. We're trying to figure out the cause. And, that really changed the way I looked at it. Because I was thinking, I'm just this awful person. I think of this all the time. I can't do anything without this, and realizing that. And then, of course, when you start the divorce process or separation, of course, you're not happy about that. There's a depression that come along with that. So it was a deep depression that was, working on all this. So he's like, you've got so many layers here, that I worked through them, but it was nice to hear him say that basically I'm not, some kind of crazed loon. It's like, hey, you struggle from depression, and this is your symptoms. I'm not a drug addict. I don't drink. Not a big thing for me. But that's what I used. It's not any better. All the consequences are basically the same. You can lose it all with anything.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I worked that route. And then once I kind of got beaten up on myself, and which the Lord was telling me that, but it's hard not to see that, and then I just kind of give it to God, and, and then, I'm on, just to be honest, I'm on an antidepressant. We worked hard to try to find something. Seems to work very well. I still have my days. If I get 3 or 4 days of rain and no sunshine, I'm a mess, yeah. But I can see it. Mine's situational. So, am I hungry? Am I tired? That is HALT.
Yeah.
What they call it. Am I hungry, tired, angry, lonely,
yep.
And I can kind of pick that out. And then I can fix it, kind of grab a hold of it before it happens. I don't want to be alone now. Yep. I need to be doing something, or I got to do this, or, so, the Lord's just been so good. I hated it for my girls. Divorce is never good regardless, but, God never promised us, a bed of roses, and, and if he did, roses have thorns. Yeah. So,
I mean, unfortunately, we still live in a fallen world with fallen people, and sometimes the best choices aren't made, and sometimes the best choices are made, and we all we have to do is rely that no matter what decisions made, God's gonna work it out for good. So
yeah, and I, my kids, they were, it affected them. They were older. Thank goodness they weren't. They were at home. My oldest one was out of school, or in college. My youngest one. My youngest was a senior in high school. Okay. So, but it's just we made it the best we could do it, but God just worked in me, and I allowed Him to work in me. I didn't do it right. I disobeyed. There were things He took me out of because I wasn't doing the right things. And I see it all now. Obedience is way better than sacrifice. So, but we still have that carnal nature. So, it was a great time in my life. I drew so close to God that it was the best of times and the worst of times.
Yeah.
So maybe cliche-ish, but it really was.
So for the person that's struggling with sexual addiction and is looking for hope outside of that stuff, what advice would you give them?
Well, I think for me, the first thing is exposing it. And, there are ways to do that, safely. I don't know that every venue you have may not be safe. I know at our church we have ways to do that. That's from even, from our pastors to, we've told our pastors, hey, just call us. If somebody needs to talk, I'll talk to them, but you need to expose it. You have to put it in the light.
Yeah.
That eliminates it's a secrecy deal. You have to expose it, and then you have to shut it off somehow. If it's your phone, if it's your computer, I can remember I got made fun of when I turned it off my phone. Like, you can't even have the internet now. And I was like, you have no idea how toxic having the internet is. So I don't have it to this day.
Yep.
Now, I have my Amazon and eBay. I can tell you, I can show you my bank statement. But I can't. It's not that time killer for me.
Yeah.
I have my apps that I can function in the world, but I just don't surf. And, when I started dating, and I told my wife, I said, hey, these are things that I have in place that keeps me, in a good place. Not that I don't struggle, but it keeps me in a good place. And if you have somebody that loves you, they understand that. And she thought that was all right. And if we're together, it's funny, she'll go, well, just look that up. And I was like, I can't look that up. She'll go, okay, I'll look it up. So, but you have to take big swings at it. You have to cut the head off the snake. You got to figure out where it is, and you got to confess it, and then you have to stop it. And you're going to fail. You're going to flop back. But that's fine. You just got to get back up and keep going. But you have to start. You have to start, because it'll eat you alive if you don't.
I agree.
And it really did. It ate me alive. I just feel like I got spit back out and got a second opportunity to get it right. And I just have a love for guys because at the time, the churches weren't talking about it. Man, our church, I love our church for that reason.
Yes.
When I came, I said, we have got to have something. And they're like, well, let's just do it. What's it look like? We didn't know what it looked like.
Yeah.
But you had to start somewhere.
Yep.
From 4 guys sitting in a corner of an office, that were just pathetic. And it was awful.
And we still have I know that you don't do the Monday night thing anymore, but we still got a group for guys that are struggling in that type of area. So.
Yep. And we're not just limited to our church on that.
Yeah.
If you want to come on Monday night, call us, get set up to do it. It's a great course to go through.
Or just show up and we'll point you in the right direction.
Yeah. So. It doesn't have to be, something. Just be with men that can go through it and understand it with you.
Yeah.
And can help you. Because if I'd had somebody tell me 15 years ago, you don't get this lined out, it's going to eat you alive and you won't have anything that you have now that you cherish.
Yeah.
I'd have freaked out. And I would love to have thought that I would have fixed it.
Yeah. You would have fixed it.
But I didn't have anybody tell me that.
Yeah.
And I want to tell people now,
Yeah.
look, dude, you don't fix this, this ain't going away.
That's right.
You know, and it just gets worse and you'll lose everything.
I agree. I agree
So-
100%. So what about, so I know that you've went through a divorce. What can you say to somebody that may be going through a divorce? You know, how can they find hope and freedom, you know, even while going through a divorce?
Well, I would say, this is going to be the craziest statement. I probably had the best divorce anybody could ever have. My ex and I are very, very cordial. You know, when it came, we split things up. We used the same lawyer. We paid for it out of the same checking account. I mean, it's crazy. We agreed on just about everything. So, but what I learned about this going through is that I can't change how she felt about me. I can't fix it. I can't change it. You'd love to think you could for somebody that you've been with for years. But if they've changed their mind or had different doubts, then I have to move on. That was tough for me.
Yeah.
I had to move on. Dude, you're going to have to move on. So my thing would be is to pour into yourself, you know, work on yourself.
Yeah.
You know, your physical, your intellectual, your
Spending
physical
time with God.
Yes. Yes. Your spiritual
Yeah.
and emotional. Work on that. They call it the pies. There's a place somewhere that calls it the pies. And it's all, your physical, your intellectual, your emotional, and your spiritual. Work on them all. And work on that. And do that. And then, because you're going to be broken, you're broken enough that things just don't seem the same. And I still struggle with it because I've told you, guys, I'm struggling with, just losing it all.
Yeah.
As anybody would feel, but as a man, especially for me, I felt like a huge failure. And I still have that. I still deal with that. Yeah. So I tell Debbie that, I still struggle with this.
Yeah.
And and just that God loves you, and he won't leave you. In fact, he seems to we all allow him to get much closer when we go through things like that.
Yeah. And what's really funny is you talked about a lot of things, and some of the biggest things that when you talk about everything that you've talked about, one of the biggest things that I hear is you got to have somebody to walk alongside you with it. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you got to have people that you're going to bring alongside, and the people that are bringing you alongside to walk. I mean, we got to walk this out. Nobody is an island. We can't do this by ourselves.
No, that's the biggest lie that the devil will tell you is, well, you can do this yourself.
Yeah.
There's no way. If you could do it yourself, you would have done it by now. And I absolutely have to say that out loud sometimes. Devil, that's not right. Because if I could have done it, I would have done it.
Yeah. 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 And that's, and I totally agree with that. I mean, that's really the biggest part about it is that once you start, because with everything that I went through, I just felt like, okay, well, nobody's going to ever accept me. Nobody's going to ever accept what I've done. And that was the biggest lie that the enemy was telling me, is that there are people out there that Christ showed me that there's people out there that follow me that love other people just as much, and they want to walk this out with you. And so that's one of my biggest things is I want to make sure that we're walking everything out together. So
yeah, and it only takes one.
Yeah.
I don't need a herd, although a herd's nice.
A herd's nice.
A herd is very nice. If you be a part of a herd, it's really great. But and I always told you that little story about when you're in a herd, you can get toward the middle.
Yeah.
You're more protected, and the wolf hangs and he watches his sheep on the outside. So I always thinking if I was a sheep, I'd be like, excuse me, pardon me, I'm going to the middle, excuse me. A herd is not bad. And your herd, is your church.
Yeah.
I told Debbie when we first started getting married, I'm going to church, if I don't, I am not the person that I want to be, and I will end up in a very bad state. So if you're listening and you think you can do it without church, that's a deception as well.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. Is there anything that you've missed? You want to add?
I think I'm good. I think I'm good. It's just taking it simple and realizing, God's plan is always different. And I always try to make sure that I listen now or can kind of see it. And just, we talked about this in our home group a lot, is just trying to bloom where I'm put.
Yeah.
And sometimes
grow where we're planted. And
sometimes in that phase, I don't like being there, but there's a reason why I'm there. And, a lot of this I look at as we're talking, I can help people with this. Mm-hmm. Because there's people that's helped me that's went through this. Absolutely. It doesn't make you a failure. You're not defined by who you are, So I don't want to be defined by, the devil wants to define me by that. But I have to make sure that I push myself out of that. But I don't want to be defined by what happened to me, but I want it to be used, for God to be able to use it to go, look, see, this is what happened to him. And I'm going through, there's nothing new under the sun. Divorce looks the same.
Yep.
The pornography addiction looks the same.
Yep.
It all starts small, gets big, and then you don't know how to handle it.
Yep.
Nothing's changed.
Yep.
Nothing's changed. So you need to find people that have either had the book handed to them to fix it or have hammered it out and fixed it and have the manual now.
Yeah.
But you need to find somebody that can do that, because you can't do it on your own.
I agree.
You have to get hooked up with people that'll just pray for you. And sometimes all you can do is pray.
Yep.
But if you can give it to God, take it day by day. Kevin would say, take it day by day.
Yep.
So.
Well, I want to thank you for being a part of this. I know that your words have always encouraged me in this, and I know others are going to be encouraged by this. I want to take this opportunity to thank you personally from my heart. Your encouragement, your words of wisdom that you've given from our Lord, and walk with me to help me walk out this Christian life. And above all, I want to thank you for being an example of Christ in my life.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me on here. I know this is a big step for you, and it's a great deal, and I'm just glad to be a part of it.
And I'm absolutely I love having you on. So I know that we've always had some good conversations. So, well, guys, that's it. I really hoped you liked our discussion. If you have any questions you would like answered, or if you have comments you would like us to share with Jeremy, please email us at the iammatthewpodcast@gmail.com. I hope this has encouraged you and that the light has overcome some darkness today. I love you, we love you, and thank you for listening. And always remember to keep putting God first, live for Him, and watch Him move in your life.